The dark side of being a millionaire.
It's Brian Preston, the money guy.
Yeah, Brian, I'm excited for us to talk about this today because it seems like in the world in which we live, becoming a millionaire or being wealthy is the status symbol that you ascribe to. People want us to be like lifestyles of the rich and famous and have wealth and have comfort and have security. But it's important to note there can be a dark side to wealth.
Well, I think people just have the wrong impression about what money will do for them. Money is just a tool.
That's
I know
right.
that sounds so easy when you see somebody in a talking head on YouTube says that to you. But because here's what I think about, though, is that I see so many people say, you know what, if I could just have $3 million or if I'm going to live like a miser, because so many people are saving to the point that they think if I get to $2 million, it's going to answer all of their hopes, their dreams, and it's going to put them in this thing. But the reality is wealth is so much more complicated than that. And that's why I say when I come back and fall back to it's a tool, people are like, what does he mean by that? And that's what this show is. It's going to answer those questions and also help you know how to make the most out of how you use your financial resources.
Yeah, there's a lot of pitfalls and traps, not only on the road to wealth, but actually even when you cross over that precipice and you are in the wealthy category, there's some things you should be aware of. And so the first one we're going to talk about, this one is probably the one that you most often think of. This is the one that kind of immediately hits you is when you do have means, when you do have resources, it does allow you to get caught up in lifestyle creep.
I think this one's interesting. You and I had a brush up against one of our clients works in an industry to where he gave us an inside track of wealthy people in their private planes and how they will spend a fortune one-upping their peers on the interiors,
simply for ego purposes.
All it is all who can flex the most. And that bothered me, especially when you find out, now look, somebody owns a private jet. I got to think a lot of those people are probably not running up credit card debt, but there's still a lot to be learned that just because somebody has what is perceived as high income or status symbols does not mean that they are actually doing what they need to with their money.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. When you think about wealthy people, you often think about higher incomes. Well, according to research from Bankrate, 17% of Americans making over $100,000, so these are six-figure individuals, cannot cover right now an unexpected $400 expense.
That's crazy.
I would make the argument that if you're making that level of income, there is no excuse for you to not be able to cover a $400 emergency expense.
Well, and then take this one. 60% of millennials making over $100,000 say they're living paycheck to paycheck.
Again, even in high cost of living areas, even if you're out on one of the coasts or if you're in a high cost place, $100,000 for a young person, a millennial being someone in their 20s, 30s, is still a decent amount of income. And over half of those folks aren't actually living below their means. They're living right at their means. That's problematic.
Well, I think a lot of people who are working through the aspirational phase, come out of college, you're trying to build the habit of saving and building wealth, but you're also trying to balance the whole consumption side of things. This was a little depressing to me to find out that people who, as their income went up, discipline with credit card debt actually became more of a struggle. And here's the stat on this. Families in the top 10% of net worth carry an average credit card balance of $12,890. Now, this one caught me off guard, bro, because
this one I was not expecting.
We run a wealth management business, and I share this all the time, is nobody who comes through our doors struggles with debt or discipline issues, meaning that I have yet to have a conversation with a client that said, hey, I have credit card debt. I have $40,000, $50,000 or even $12,890 of credit card debt. Can you help me get out of this credit card debt? That doesn't happen. That's a basic struggle that I don't see with wealthy people. So when I see a stat like this, I'm like, something just doesn't compute.
Yeah, what's so interesting is this isn't the average. This isn't the average American household. This is families in the top 10%. So you would say in the upper echelons, and they are still living beyond their means. If you have credit card debt, that's exactly what that means. And so the question you might ask is, how does this happen? What tends to take place? Well, if you've been listening to our show any amount of time, you've heard us talk about this. They often get caught up on the hedonic treadmill. And whenever we use interesting vocabulary, we like to define it for you. The hedonic treadmill describes the tendency of humans to quickly return to a stable level of happiness after making major life changes. So help me bridge this, Brian. How does that connect with the fact that folks in the 10% top wealthiest families still have credit card debt or still racking up consumption?
Well, I think it goes like this. I mean, we all aspire to have nicer things. And you're thinking, okay, I have this average car, but if I went to this luxury car, I bet that would make me happier.
Sure.
And the problem is the dopamine hit, meaning when your brain, all the excitement, all the things, that come with it, juices flowing, as they say. I know that's probably a weird thing to say, but you quickly adjust and absorb that lifestyle change, and then you're looking for the next thing. And that's
right.
the part you want to keep repeating the process. And before you know it, you can price yourself out of happiness. So let's talk about what does this mean in terms of how you should function things. Is that when you have bad things happen in your life, meaning like if you lost your job or you became, displaced or something like that, make all the adjustments you can as fast as possible.
You
because
want to group negative things.
You want to group negative things because it shows that the human tendency is that we adjust to things rapidly. However, on the positive side of life, you want to spread out happiness events as much as possible. This is one of those things when we meet people who have come into, sold a company, sold land, because you hear this about lottery people.
Sure.
They're out there trying to buy the car, the house, they're trying to get gifts,
home.
the vacations, they're loading people up, and they can't figure out why they're not happy, why they're in this state of misery. The reason is they piled it all in at once, and they totally did not use the hedonic treadmill in the appropriate fashion.
And so if lifestyle creep is a problem, if that's something that a lot of wealthy people or people of means fall prey to, what are some money guy tips that can help us not fall into that trap? What are some ways we can protect ourselves? Well, the very first one, hyper focus on what you love. Figure out what it is that creates happiness for you and do more of those things. So if it's quality times with friends, quality times with family, fill in the blank, try to find a way to spend more time doing the things that you know will bring you happiness and fulfillment.
Yeah, this is something I think is always an interesting exercise. And I would challenge you, if you've never sat down and just think about your Sunday through Saturday and say, what in the past 7 days, what were the things that made me happy? What were the things that stressed me out? And you might be surprised that some of those things that made you happy were actually pretty cheap.
Yep.
Or, because we always hear, especially with this latte factor, a lot of people tell you latte factor, you going to Starbucks and buying a coffee is going to keep you working for the rest of your life. Maybe not.
That might not
it's
be the
definitely
case.
part of discipline. Maybe that is you waking up, like recording days. I'll just go ahead and make this, bring it self-reflective. On recording days, we always batch a lot of this recording on Tuesday. It is one of my happiest times that I know that we're getting a coffee and going over the show notes.
Yep.
And that simple factor, we should hyper focus and figure out how we can do more of the things that actually bring us happiness. Now, Bo, you have a recent event that actually something that brought me tons of joy, but then you tried to do it in your life, and it didn't turn out with the same results.
It was super interesting. I think you tagged this line in pre-show prep. You said society should not often tell you how to spend your money because society has a conflict of interest. And one of the things, my wife and I, we have young kids. We took them to Disney World for the first time, and Disney World was amazing and it was awesome, and they got to do the things. But it wasn't quite what I was expecting, Brian, because you had a different experience. You could remember some nostalgia of when you were there with your father and your kids reacted. My kids really enjoyed it and had a great time, but it was not this life-changing trip. Fast forward 1 week. For Mother's Day, my wife wanted me to take her and the girls fishing. My family's never been fishing, not something we do, but there's a local river by our house. So I got some fishing gear. We went out and we just hung out at the river. And they loved it. And I did not spend more than $20 on this trip. And my kids were so excited that they could take their shoes off and run in the river and run in the creek, more so than this big, nice, fancy Disney trip. Now, that's not to say that you shouldn't do one or the other, but it was really interesting for me to see, the thing that I thought was going to be the thing that brings happiness to my family wasn't necessarily the thing that did. And I think the more you can do an assessment and figure those out, the better you'll be able to hyper-focus on the things that you truly love, not just the things that the society says you should love.
Well, I think happiness is custom. It's very custom. I mean, let's take this Disney example, is that I think it's interesting. I've shared with you, my father passed away pretty early. I was in my 20s when my dad passed away. So the first time I went to Disney with my kids, I had flashbacks, very vibrant flashbacks of being there that one time with my family when I was like in the 7th grade. And then remember also, I have a special needs child, and then I have a neurotypical child, and they just don't have a ton in common.
Sure.
So one of the few places where everybody's kind of united and we're, really building great memories is at these amusement parks.
I love it.
So, but that's my situation. Yours, it sounds like, hey, being outside, putting the bait on the hooks,
getting dirty.
I mean, that type of stuff. That's why happiness is very much a custom thing. Don't let a marketer, don't let an advertisement, don't let society tell you what happiness is, because you might be sold an empty bag.
So hyper-focusing on what you love is one tip to help you avoid lifestyle creep. Another tip is create an emotional decision protection plan. Find a way to put roadblocks, and I say that sort of tongue-in-cheek, but to put roadblocks in your way to consumption so that you don't often make purchasing decisions that you wouldn't otherwise.
Well, I think about so much of what is driven by the people who are working against your wealth journey is that they have a conflict of interest. They're trying to encourage consumption. They're not in your best interest, so they make things sound so much better than they are, and it's a very emotional. That what I like when this is what I'm talking about is that if you can practice on slowing down the process, slowing everything down so that you can now start isolating what's emotional versus what you need, the whole needs versus wants type of analysis. I think a level-headed, meaning time is on your side and you slow the process down, you'll make a better decision.
So here's a real easy thing. Before you make some major purchase, give yourself at least maybe a 24-hour, 48-hour cooling period to make sure that purchase you're making, that thing you're buying, is not an emotional, rash decision, and it's something that actually makes sense for you to purchase. Another thing you can do is, if you're in a household with a significant other, set some sort of dollar limit where there's a check-in point. It's not a permission point. It's not you asking, hey, can I do this? It's, hey, I'm thinking about buying this thing or purchasing this thing or having this experience. What do you think about? How does that make you feel? Where are you at on that? So that way you can kind of make the decision together, and perhaps some blind spots you may not recognize you have can become uncovered.
Well, and I'll tell you something I do as a strategy, and this could be not for just consumption of buying something, but it's also like when you're planning trips or big purchases, is I'm a hyper researcher.
Love it.
What I like about becoming a hyper researcher is that I've found just being on the journey towards something that's perceived as fun can be part of the happiness factor that comes from it. So if I'm researching a trip, I'm looking at all the TripAdvisor reviews. If I'm researching a new gadget or something, or a vehicle or anything like that, I'm going to probably research this thing, and that works out all the emotional stuff. It works out you just going out there and compulsively buying it. It really does help you create a more disciplined focus on your consumption.
And so then the third money guy tip that you can think about to help you avoid lifestyle creep is figure out how to get out of the fast lane. Stop this thing of comparing yourself to everyone else in the world. When you move into a neighborhood and you see your house, and then all of a sudden neighbor houses pop up, you start thinking, oh man, I like that thing, or they get a pool and I want a pool, or they get a new car, I want a new car. Stop the comparison game, because oftentimes it's going to force you to make decisions that you should not make. Just because you could does not mean that you should.
Well, there's that famous Teddy Roosevelt quote that is, comparison is the thief of joy. And that is so true. And that also, this is something I learned, my wife and I, probably about stereotypical 7 years into our marriage, we went to a counselor, and that counselor really shared with us the power of controlling the inner voice.
That's great.
And I think it's not only relationship advice that you have to control that inner voice, it's also in how you look at money, because I'm just going to tell you, as you start having success, and you should celebrate that success, I want you to be careful of this. Back to this whole comparison thing. There is always, no matter where you are in success, there's going to be somebody who has more. I remember when Elon Musk supposedly became and this is alleged, I don't know if this is true, but this is an urban legend at this point. When he became the richest person in the world, he had a solid silver number 2 sent to Jeff Bezos.
Okay.
And I don't know if this is true, but you just can sense that these people are in a battle to see who can have the most. So I just say, don't even get into that rat race and just whisper to yourself, no matter how much I have, somebody's going to have more than me. But that's okay because I know what I value. That's where the important thing is. And then here's another thing. And Bo, you do a good thing about this. When we have a lot of team meetings, we have monthly team meetings here. And at the end of the wrap-up session, you ask the entire team, let's go around the room. Tell me one thing you're thankful for. I mean, I do this with my kids. I have been so inspired by this. Whenever my youngest daughter is complaining about something in her life that's annoying her and she's whining about it, I say, look, let's turn this upside down. You are whining a lot. Tell me something you're thankful for. Because let's change this mindset, because you really can control how optimistic or what your worldview is if you really take a direct action on it.
And the more you remind yourself of it, the less you'll forget it. That seems like common sense, but it's so necessary when it comes to our wallets, when it comes to how we make financial decisions. So, all right, the first trap that you can fall into, or first thing wealth can lead to, is it can lead to lifestyle creep. Here's the second one, and this one, this is a little tongue-in-cheek too. You may find out that even with wealth, it can still leave you unhappy.
Yeah, we've used this before, and I think it's so powerful. Jim Carrey has a quote on this. He says, I think everybody should get rich and famous and do everything they ever dreamed of so they can see it's not the answer.
I think it's, Jim Carrey, he's an interesting person. He did an interview back in I think it was the mid-'80s, right? And he said, I knew I was going to be a successful actor, and I wrote myself a check paid for services rendered for, I think it was $10 million, wasn't it? And he said, I'm gonna be able to cash this check by 1990 or 1995. It was a few years in the future. And so he was driven and he was motivated and he desired to be able to cash a $10 million check. And when you think about this quote he said, it seems like he got there and he realized, oh man, maybe there was more to this. Maybe this wasn't all I thought that it would be.
Yeah, more money does not necessarily equate to more happiness. So let's focus on, really what can help with this. The first thing understanding is overestimating how much pleasure you'll get from money in general. I mean, I think this is a part that a lot of people, it's back to the daydreaming. If I could just have $3 million, I wouldn't have a worry in the world. That's false. You would have something to worry about. So don't overestimate how much money's going to bring to you, because humans, we're highly adaptive, and more than likely you'll absorb it. You'll get back to that hedonic treadmill that we talked about previously. So money is not going to be the panacea of solving all your problems.
And we notice that the goalposts always move. If you say, if I just get to this income level, well, then I'll be this happy, or this income, I'll be this happy, or this income, I'll be this happy. What happens is when you overestimate that pleasure giving of money, you're going to find yourself in a place where it's never going to be enough. So I don't think I would bank on that. The other thing that I would recognize is oftentimes more money, more wealth can lead to more stress in your financial life and in your total life in general.
Well, and the data supports this too. I mean, I think about even some of the neighborhoods and some of my neighbors, they make great incomes, great lives, but they travel constantly. I mean, because that's the thing. Companies don't just give out tons of money for just because you're a likable person. I mean, there's usually an expectation that they're expecting more out of you. And you see that come through on the anxiety and stress. 68% of high income individuals making over $250,000 report feeling regularly stressed at work. Now, you hear that stat and you're like, okay, but I need some context here. So 68% of people making over $250,000. Well, you compare that, 38% of those making between $51,000 to $75,000 state that 38% of them regularly feel stressed. Okay. That's well below 68. And then people making under $50,000, only 47% of them feel stressed. That shows you we have a problem here where money was obviously not the solution. It actually might have created more stress for these individuals.
And if you can even think about this on the extremes. There was a study that found CEOs, right? So
they're rich.
They're the chief executive officers of major publicly traded corporations. They are depressed at a rate of more than double the rate of the general public, which is already about 20%. So that means about 40% of CEOs, chief executives, who you would think have everything in the world they want. They have power, they have influence, they have wealth, they have money, and yet they still are depressed at incredibly high rates. So money may not be the thing that ultimately brings happiness.
Well, there's even been research on children in wealthy societies versus impoverished societies. And unbelievably, there's more depression in the countries that have more than countries that have less. That's always, so you're quickly realizing that money, and especially that it's back to that comparison as the thief of joy, is causing you problems. So let's talk about what are the Money Guy tips that can help you navigate this.
Yeah, I think the very first one is you need to really understand what money is and what money isn't. We've already said this. Money is a tool. It is simply a thing that will allow you to do the things in life that matter to you that you want to focus on. Money and wealth is not the goal. It's not the purpose. It's not the outcome. It's not the thing that you should strive for. It is the tool that you use to be able to achieve those things that are worth striving for.
So let's talk to the big thing. This is and we talk about this constantly. There's been TED Talks on this. The big driver of purpose is you've got to ask yourself, why? What am I actually put on this earth to do? What's my purpose? Because if you can figure out that, if you can figure out when you wake up in the morning, you're getting out of bed and you're making this earth, this planet, a little bit better. Once you know your why, you are much more likely to have fulfillment and happiness. And that's a big part of this because it will help you navigate this in a much more responsible way.
Yeah, we've talked a lot about knowing your why. And when you know your why, that's what actually ends up leading to fulfillment in this life. We did an entire episode about the 5 levels of building wealth. If you've not checked that out, go check that out. If you've not checked that out, go check that out. Because when you reach the fulfillment stage of building wealth, you begin to truly know who you are, what you value, and what brings you purpose. And when you begin to understand those things, money is a side effect. It is no longer the thing causing you to be distracted. It's the thing you're able to utilize to move you towards your ultimate goals.
Well, and once again, that's contrarian because I think most people would think of really stage 4 of the levels of wealth and the fact that they think financial independence, just doing what you want, when you want, and how you want. That's not necessarily fulfillment. The fulfillment is getting back to knowing who you are, what brings you value, and what brings you purpose. Those things. That's the why, and that's what we want you to focus on.
So we know that one piece of being wealthy, or one dark side of being wealthy, is that you can get caught up in lifestyle creep. We also know that it may not necessarily lead to happiness or lead to greater happiness. Another really sad and tragic truth about money as well and wealth is it can very well be the thing that ruins your next generation.
Well, I think, let me do the glass half full first, because I'm an optimist, naturally an optimist, and I love sharing the stats that 80% of millionaires are first generation, meaning that they've, don't come from a lot of resources, they've saved, they've used a lot of the things we cover on the Money Guy, and they become successful. Well, if you really think about that, now we're analytical, we're technicians. If you take that apart, the only way that stat can be true is if wealth is fleeting in the short term, because it does disappear. And think about this. This is known stats that we see over and over again, is that wealthy families, typically 70% of the wealth disappears by the second generation. 90% of the wealth disappears and evaporates by the third generation. That is so sad.
It's so sad to think about all the hard work you do in building this wealth, deferring gratification, making good decisions to provide for your kids and hopefully one day even their kids. And ultimately, by the time it gets to your grandchildren, all of that wealth has disappeared. I don't think that that is the legacy that most wealthy folks want to leave. What they would want to do is say, man, I was able to be part of that 80% of first generations. How can I pass these types of decision-making processes? How can I pass these traits onto my next generation so that they don't become part of this statistic?
Yeah, so let's talk about this. Let's go through some of these Money Guy tips, because look, as parents, we both have daughters. You worry. I take the responsibility. How do we try to get our children? Because I think a lot of the wrongs of the world that we talk about is a lot of time it is social economics.
Absolutely.
Wealth creates easiness and opportunity, but it also can ruin in some ways, because that hunger, that desire to strive for more might be that fire or that ember that's ablaze at a younger age might be actually put out if you overindulge too much. So let's actually go through some of these tips. Number one is know the components of happiness and fulfillment. And I actually want to go through these.
Yeah. So we call this, quit swimming upstream, right? Yeah. So know what actually makes you happy. I want to give you a huge compliment, Brian, because you did one thing that I thought was beautiful. We live in a unique community here in the Nashville suburbs where there's a lot of wealth in this area. And there are a lot of neighbors that we have, a lot of friends that we have, that when their children turn 16 and start driving, they get a brand new car. They get like the nice luxury brand. You can go through a number of the school parking lots in this area, and you'll be amazed at how many fancy, nice cars that you saw. You made a very different decision when it came time for your oldest daughter to begin driving, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of those things, and it was tough because we could afford to buy a nicer car for my oldest, but I was worried about, I really thought long and hard about this, because there's a part of you as a parent, you're like, okay, I need to buy the newest car because it's going to have the best safety features. But you're like, man, but that's really going to take away the opportunity to learn that self-discipline or the ability to enjoy the power of wanting something, saving for something, and building something. So I actually went the path of, I had my oldest daughter, she had to pay for half of her car.
I love it.
And so because she had to pay half, she's got a 14-year-old car. I mean, and I like that. We've actually had a lot of conversations on this because my wife was showing me on social media the other night, somebody in her college life just bought their 16-year-old child a European luxury car, brand new. And I was like,
for a 16-year-old.
I mean, compare and contrast that to our daughter, who's now who has a 14-year-old car. But I just think about it. I fast forward and I see when my daughter graduates college, goes off to and gets her first real job. When she upgrades her car, whether it's used or whether it's just a reasonably priced brand new car, there's going to be so much feeling of accomplishment with that. And then I think that if you can gin up that engine of, man, this felt good. It's back to that hedonic treadmill. This felt good that I could take this okay car, this safe car, but now we can go to a little nicer car. It brings happiness. I think about this with my first house, then my second house, and now I'm on to my third house, as I've upgraded each time. There's things I improved each time. There's features I picked up, and it's fun. It's part of the journey, and that's what can bring fulfillment, because there's something about if all of a sudden you start at the top. I mean, think about Drake. Started at the bottom and now we're here. There's a reason he has that in the song lyrics. If you start at the top,
it's hard to go up.
Man, it is. I mean, you can fall off that ladder so much easier. So, I mean, and look, we can do this exercise. I started off with a 1984 Chevy Cavalier. My friends affectionately called it the Ragalier all through college. Moved to my first car was a used Mazda 626. Loved that car with the oscillating fans in the middle. I thought it was the coolest car in the world, even though it was a very reasonably priced $10,000 car that I graduated and bought used. The next one, I think when my wife and I bought a Ford Explorer used, we thought that was the bomb diggity. And then I got a used Acura. And then I bought my first car, was that Lexus ES350. It was the first new car I'd ever had. And look, we drove that car for over a decade. You need to be part of the journey. You need to be careful. And I consider that also part of underindulging.
Well, what I love about that so much, Brian, is one of the things you just hit on is focusing on experiences rather than things. Because I think about the experience that you gave your daughter in being able to save up for her first car, being able to have some ownership in that, being able to be a part of that process. That is so much more valuable than you just buying a car for her. And this can go for anything, whether it be trips or birthdays or Christmases or whatever. If you can focus on the experience of the moment over the bright, shiny thing, you'll be amazed at how much more valuable and how much longer lasting that'll go with your kids.
Well, I mean, I'm now at the age where eating a good meal by a chef that is like an artisan.
Sure.
it's glorious. I mean, especially if you're going with neighbors and you get to enjoy the nice meal and you know it's expensive, but you appreciate it. If you did this every night,
you'd lose some of its luster.
Lose it. And I think that sometimes as human nature is we think if it's good, more of it must be better. But if anybody who grew up going to buffet and eating buffet food,
more is not
always better. I mean, so that's why underindulging is actually good. Hey, here's the other thing I think is important. As a kid, you hear to give is the better than to receive. I remember as a kid, when I was into Star Wars, I'd be like, that's crazy. Who thinks that giving is better than receiving? They obviously have never received a Greedo or the new Darth Vader or this or that. It's just that, but as you get older, you realize, man, there is so much value and wisdom in that statement because because when I was coming out of college and broke and you went out to eat, and maybe there was a parent that came out with, like you went to a Georgia football game and somebody had their father was with them and they bought dinner for everybody. I remember thinking, oh man,
that's amazing.
They don't realize that $60 I just saved on this nice meal is going to help me pay for gas, go help me buy for groceries. And, it's probably not that big of a deal for them, but it meant a lot. And I made sure I said, thank you. You're always great at saying thank you. So now that I can pay it forward to someone, I see the enjoyment you can have by paying it forward and spending on someone else. And then, Bo, here's the last thing on this, because you're so good at this. Happiness is not about the consumption. We have found out there's lots of research that it actually ties more into relationships. What do we mean by that?
Yeah, so when you actually do a study of happiness and fulfillment and what brings people happiness, it's actually concentrated in some specific areas of your life. One is your faith. This thinking of ideas and things that are not of this world, something of bigger than yourself. This idea of family, solid relationships of people that are going to be there for your entire life. Community, meaning making the environment around you better, pouring into the lives of those around you. And then your work, the place where you spend the majority of your time on the majority of your days. If you're gonna be there, you might as well make sure it's somewhere you want to be and you're doing something you want to do. If you can find how to be well-rounded in those four areas, faith, family, community, and work, you'll be amazed at how much more healthy of a view you have on wealth and money and how much more healthy of a view you're going to pass on to your kids as it relates to wealth and money.
Bo, I remember, now this is a memory back in Georgia when we were located in Georgia. You were all excited when this new sandwich shop came into town. Was it Jimmy John's?
I think it was Jimmy John's,
Jimmy John's. Well, I remember one time you took me over there to try a sandwich, and you're going to figure out why I'm saying this in a minute. I went to the restroom.
Okay.
And in the restroom, and I don't know if this is at every Jimmy John's, I'm sure people will give us comments, but there was I don't know, it was a proverb or a story or a wives' tale, whatever it was, but it shared about this rich man who goes to this foreign poor country, and he's like, I'm working so hard so that I can one day retire and go and fish all day and do things how I want. Meanwhile, the poor fisherman in this far off land basically said, "That's my everyday life. I fish. I hang out with my family. I hang out with my family and friends, my neighbors. I have everything that you were trying to build wealth for." There is something just incredibly impactful when you hear that story. It's like maybe priorities of stuff needs to be recalibrated with experiences, memories, relationships. There's a lot of value in that. Let's I think, I always bring things back to the origin story, Bo, and I kind of close out the show today. One of the big inspirations in my life was the Millionaire Next Door. Dr. Thomas Stanley is the reason we have it on set. That's a signed version, by the way. I had the fortune to get a copy of that before Dr. Stanley unfortunately passed away. But it is one of those things I always say we ought to close out because there's so much knowledge that can come from just understanding the 7 factors of wealth. Yeah, there are 7 things that he said were common traits or commonalities amongst the millionaires he studied. Number 1, they live below their means. They figured out deferred gratification. That's discipline. Number 2, they allocate their time, energy, and money efficiently. They're not wasteful. Number 3, financial independence is more important than displaying high social status. They're not trying to keep up with the Joneses. They're not comparing themselves to others.
Number 4, their parents did not provide economic outpatient care, meaning they actually built wealth and made decisions on their own. Number 5, their adult children are economically self-sufficient, meaning they trained up kids who did not have to depend on them for their well-being. Number 6, they are proficient in targeting market opportunities, meaning when they see opportunities, they understand they have to go seize it. Number 7, they chose the right occupation. They figured out if I got to do something for my entire working career, I might as well do something that I'm good at, that I enjoy doing, and that I can make a good living doing.
Look, I think the big takeaway from today's show is there is nothing wrong with desiring and trying to build wealth. But you better make sure you spend some time and some effort on the why. What am I actually doing? Where am I trying to go to? We always hear, what is it? The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People is begin with the end in mind. If you're not thinking about what that end is, what the why is, why you're waking up in the morning, I think you are losing, you're basically lost the plot. You don't even know why you're working, what's giving you purpose. And that's why you got some homework. And that's why I love that we get to create content and share with you guys all the things you ought to be considering on this wealth journey. That's why we talk about the abundance cycle, Bo. And let me tell you how this hits you. We have created content for every person at every level. For those just starting out, if you just want to know what to do with your next dollar, I invite you to go to resources.moneyguy.com and you can download the 9 steps of the financial order of operations. I got thrown by the 7 factors of wealth that's on the slide in front
and
of
me. And it's actually moneyguy.com/resources.
But we do have the 9 steps of the financial order of operations. If you want a more in-depth, if you want to kind of accelerate your wealth building journey, actually go use some of our paid tools that we've created. We've got courses, we've got net worth tools. You can go to learn.moneyguy.com and you can accelerate your wealth there. And then of course, the last step, if you want to take the relationship to the next level, we have maybe stirred something up inside of you. And you say, hey, these guys, I can tell they're not only good technically from an analytical standpoint, these guys understand the value of purpose and the value of knowing where you're going with your money and the why factor. Maybe I want to take the relationship to the next level because I'd love to have somebody kind of curate that discussion with my loved ones as well. Then that is the graduation point of the abundance cycle. And we do work with clients all across the country. We love creating content. Go check it all out. MoneyGuy.com. I'm your host, Brian Preston. Mr. Bo Hansen, Money Guy team, out.